Uh,
There you
my
go.
my topic will be the worst Universalist or the worst Universalist Unitarian that I ever met. And if I speak to you again, I'm working on one that would be called, I think, the worst Universalist who ever lived.
Hmm.
So, and I'll let you guess who that might be. Some of you Universalist historians probably have a good idea of that already, of who I would be talking about.
Well, now we have to invite you back. That's
Yes, please don't miss. Yeah, no, I've started thinking and pulling out the Universalist stuff. I was for my first ministry, first full-time ministry was a Universalist church, and they had a wonderful old 100-year-old library of Universalist books, and I was able to immerse myself when I was there. And I've always considered myself somewhat more of a Universalist minister than a Unitarian minister. Though I'm
well,
comfortable.
Craig,
Go ahead.
since we're kind of winging it here, let me do two things. First, the Universalist Convocation started in 1990 as a way for Universalists, mostly on the East Coast, Maine, Florida, east of the Mississippi, to gather in fellowship. And they have done so in physical convocations for years. Um, some being very well attended, some being not so well attended, some in big cities, some in tiny cities. But it's an opportunity for those who still wish to learn and celebrate our Universalist history to have an opportunity to gather together and meet new people. That's how I met Richard, because through a series of circumstances, not necessarily to be told, I attended a convocation in 2017 and then again in 2018, two in a row. So Richard and Justin then asked me to be president of the convocation. I didn't understand that was the only qualification required at that time. But it is a wonderful way of getting people to get together. We have a website, universalistconvocation.org. We will be holding another physical convocation in May of next year in
Newberry.
Newberry, South Carolina, at the Clayton Memorial Church, and it's very significant because South Carolina is really the birthplace of Southern Universalism. So if people have any questions, you can go to our website and look at the about us and the history, et cetera. And my second order of business, if you would be so kind, Craig, to do a brief bio introduction of yourself.
Sure.
And may I ask, please, that everyone mute themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, that'll prevent those annoying echoes that we sometimes get, or the annoying dogs that we sometimes get. Unfortunately, my dog may go off at any moment, but hopefully not. But my name's Craig Moro. I served my church internship with Paul Sawyer, with the Reverend Paul Sawyer, if that means anything to anyone. He's the Unitarian minister who is in the electric Kool-Aid acid test, who was a fellow traveler of Ken Kesey and others. So that was sort of my training. Very intense situation. It was 1979, and I retired after serving a number of churches in 2023. So I'm starting to get used to retirement. I have lived in India, I've lived in Thailand, I've lived in Singapore, the Netherlands, Japan, and I've been around. And I'm enjoying my time here. I hope it lasts a long time. So, and with that, shall I start? Shall we start the program? Okay, very good. I'm going to start with a reading. There's really no list ranking the characters in the Old Testament from best to worst. But if there was, King David would show up somewhere near both ends of it. Here you see him doing heroic stuff like braining that giant Goliath with a sling stone. But look over there, and you find him doing things that are awfully naughty. For example, one day he peeped from his palace roof over at a neighbor's house and saw a beautiful woman bathing. He soon learned that her name was Bathsheba, and she was the wife of one of his best soldiers, Uriah the Hittite. David had her brought to him. He, as the Bible said, laid with her, and soon she sent word that she was pregnant. David then arranged for Uriah to be sent to the front lines of the next battle without any backup, and he was killed. Nice way to work the system, King. The Bible now says that David sent for Bathsheba and brought her into his house. She became his wife, bore him a son. But what David had done was wrong in the eyes of the Lord. David, you see, was already married and had many wives and many children, and had more than enough of everything even a king might ever need. So the Bible says the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to David, who said to the king, "There were once two men in the same city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had large flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing of his own except one little ewe lamb. He reared her himself, and she grew up in his home with his own children. She ate from his dish, drank from his cup, and nestled in his arms. She was like a daughter to him." And this, by the way, is the only pet ever mentioned in the Bible. Well, one day, a traveler came to the rich man's house, and he, too mean to take something from his own flocks and herds to give to his guest, stole the poor man's lamb and served her up for dinner. David was very angry and burst out, "As the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He shall pay for the lamb 4 times over because he has done this and shown no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. You have done wrong in the eyes of the Lord in how you took Bathsheba from her husband." The great preacher Fred Craddock would tell this story as an example of what he called overhearing, and used it to teach seminary students what he believed is the best way to preach. Let your listeners overhear their own story in whatever story you tell from the pulpit, like King David did when he heard the story of the rich man and the poor man and his daughter, the lamb, and like we do when we hear David's. Let us assess our own actions based on what we overhear in the stories of others. Now let's overhear this.
Are you playing music?
I played a chime. Did you hear it, or was it too high pitched?
No.
Oh, oh, too high pitched. I need to get a lower one. Enough of the sermon. Today, I want to tell you the story of someone who was probably the worst so-called Universalist Unitarian I ever met. When I first met her, I was a candidate to serve her church full time. I don't want to tell you her real name, so I've chosen to call her Dorcine. I don't think that's anyone's real name. At least it isn't hers. So it's common, or it used to be common, when a minister and a congregation are forming a new relationship for a day to come that seems like election day, when the congregation votes yes or no. Before the vote on continuing my ministry came before Dorcine's congregation, she approached me to say that she thought a minister should wear a suit and tie. I told her that I thought such clothes were more suited for businessmen and politicians, and I was not in business or politics. She repeated that she liked to see a man in a suit and tie. I wouldn't vote for one who didn't wear them. I didn't think she was kidding, but she did laugh when I promised that I would wear a tie if I ever performed a funeral service for her. There was only one vote against calling me to that historically Universalist church. Dorcine came up to me later and proudly announced that vote was hers. I told her that I knew it was and that it was okay if she really felt so strongly about the tie. It was important for her to do what was right in her eyes. I wish that I could tell you that I stood up to her every time and did what was right in my own eyes on much more important matters than the tie, the way the prophet Nathan stood up to David. I wish I could tell you that, but I can't. I first met Dorcine a week before the vote, at a dinner planned to introduce me to the oldest and most powerful families, not only in the church, but in the whole surrounding area. Let's say it was a big, isolated rutabaga growing valley in the Northeast, even though it wasn't. Let's also say that most agricultural workers and the majority of the laboring class in that area were poor French-speaking Haitians, although they weren't. This is close enough to the real physical and social geography of the place for purposes of overhearing. The church had the surnames of its powerful English-speaking rutabaga field-owning families, like my dinner hosts, on its beautiful windows, each name inscribed on a sweet stained glass angel, so you might think they owned the place. The purpose of the dinner was to let me know that, more or less, they did. Later, I learned that these families were closely intermarried so that things would stay that way. I had stumbled on a sort of feudal system right in the USA. The strangest thing was that so many of the feudal lords and ladies of the valley were members of the old Universalist church. Dinner was served by French-speaking servants, punctuated by Dorcine and her sister, with cracks about the Haitians and their backwards Catholic faith, right in front of the Haitian maid who was pouring wine and water for her masters and their guest. I held my tongue, and I still regret that I did. I was acting like there was an election coming the next week, or some regular job offer, not a call to speak the truth as best I could. Never before had I eaten food that was cooked and served by people who were not eating at the table with me, except at a restaurant or wedding reception. I could have said that, right? But there was not one word from me to hear or overhear about who cooks, serves, sits, and so on. I heard Dorcine speak on several occasions about how well the landowning families treated their Haitians, but I also had several chances to see how poorly she thought of them. The church rented its facilities to a fast-growing Haitian congregation of Seventh-day Adventists on Saturdays. When Dorcine's grandson, Chad, was planning to get married, she showed up unannounced at the counseling session that I'd scheduled with the young couple. Grandma was planning the wedding. The couple were planning the wedding for a Saturday early to be followed by a brunch reception on Dorcine's rutabaga plantation. Couldn't I do something about getting the SDAs out of the church that day? Seventh-day Adventists, SDAs, right? I told her that that wasn't my decision to make. It would probably violate our legal agreement with them. It seemed wrong to displace an entire congregation to accommodate one family, but she could petition the board if she wanted to. Board support for the SDAs using the church was an old issue for Dorcine, I learned. She told me, I never thought they should be here. And then wondered aloud why what these Haitians were doing worshiping in our church on Saturdays, since weren't they all supposed to be Catholics anyway? I noticed the grandson's fiance looking at me as if for help several times during this harangue. Looking sheepish, you could say, like a little lamb who fears that instead of being seated at the center, she might be laid out on top of her own wedding table, next to the potatoes, with a plum in her mouth and mint sauce on the side. I was sorry that I was in no position to help her then, but hoped that I could do so at our next counseling session without Grandma there. But between these two sessions, Dorcine called me to tell me to be sure to ask the couple about their plans to raise their kids Catholic or UU. I hadn't had a chance to find out the first time that the young woman was herself Catholic, let alone a chance to talk through the possibility of maybe letting her faith tradition be part of her children's future. Grandma assured me on this one, Chad will call the wedding off if she won't give in. Now that's the UU spirit. If they're still married, I will eat my tie.
Mhm.
I regret to say that I did perform the wedding against all my better instincts. It was a very warm day for that time of year, and I sweated profusely throughout the service. Drops of it ran off my nose and stained the pages of my ceremony script. I'm not sure if it was just the heat or the bad faith steaming under my robe and stole. I made a vow that this would not happen again. Not long after, Dorcine contacted me about performing a wedding for her oldest daughter, who was remarrying after a divorce. Sorry, I told her. I'll be hundreds of miles away at the time at a conference. She offered to have a private plane pick me up mid-conference, fly me back to the church for the wedding, then return me to the conference, and even pay me something for my services this time. I declined as politely as I could. The declining was certainly noticed and mentioned, the politeness not so much. Now, the church had a very interesting caretaker who came in every day, what you used to call a sexton. We liked each other a lot, and I would sometimes fake a Cockney accent and say things like, "Morning, sexton, how have you been faring?" He was an introspective soul who had studied more esoteric religious books than I ever will. I'll call him Warren. Besides helping at the church, Warren was also the handyman on Dorcine's family plantation, where she lived with her husband, Merv. Well, actually, Merv spent much of his time in the state capitol, where he served as a lobbyist, working the state legislators on behalf of agribusiness concerns, pushing enhanced tax breaks for landowners, but holding back on benefit guarantees for Haitian field hands. Always in a suit and tie, of course. Lobbying. Lobbying was really how the whole family got things done. A lobbyist doesn't need to worry about truth or principles. You know the drill. You work the climate of choice, the environment of decision making. Take the legislator boys on a cruise ship, pile on the pamphlets, pass the fine cigars, serve a leg of lamb, maybe baby ewe lamb. Arrange to bring some other babes for company. When you control the environment of choice, the truth hardly matters. Make them feel like they've just got to go along, and most likely they will. Meanwhile, back in the somewhat tamer environment of church, Dorcine worked our environment of choice probably better than her husband worked his politicians, turning up the institutional stress thermostat that she kept in her purse whenever it suited her purposes. Well, speaking of environment, one day while Warren the sexton was working to rearrange a storage room in the cool church basement, he found a box of neatly bound minutes of board meetings from the middle years of the 20th century. Thumbing out of historical interest through the years of his childhood, which for Warren also happened to be the years of Joe McCarthy and the communist witch hunts, he found an interesting document. It was a letter from Dorcine written in the early 1950s. He read it carefully, then brought it up to my office to show me. In her letter to the board and the minister, Dorcine demanded that all the communists be thrown out of church immediately. It's not clear from the records who these communists were. Possibly an early social justice group concerned about the rights of the Haitian field workers who at that time lived in unheated shacks without water or electricity. Or possibly they were bearded Bolsheviks who wore fuzzy hats and made bombs in the basement. Who knows? Anyway, there were church members, from what the letter said, Universalists like Dorcine, and that just had to change. "See how you'll get along without me," she said, while the stained glass angels held their breath. If the board and the minister would not expel these communists, Dorcine threatened to lead an exodus of the wealthiest families out of the church who would take their money with them. She claimed that she had already secured their agreement and to be speaking on their behalf, working the environment of choice, saying, you've got to go along because everyone who matters already has. Or else she would bring the church down and it would all be the leader's fault for not seeing things her way. Warren and I looked through some more minute books to see what the board and minister had done, but we couldn't find anything. Either nothing happened or it happened off the record. And Dorcine was still there decades later, the sun still shining through the angel on the window with her family name, rosy gold, on her sweet round face. Maybe the people Dorcine disliked had been made so uncomfortable that they all left on their own. Or maybe neither board nor minister could think of any reason why, as Universalists, they should do anything about these so-called communists, except attach Dorcine's letter to the minutes. The letter pretty well summed up the opposite of what Universalism is all about. So maybe they saved it as a good example for future generations of how far many Universalists still had to go in learning to practice what they claimed was a saving religion. I still have a long way to go myself. You know from this story that I sometimes fall short in not only doing, but even in saying what I should as a Universalist or Unitarian, let alone as someone who's supposed to carry the flame of both traditions high and bright through day or night. Well, while on vacation from Dorcine's church one year, I found myself by the side of a motel swimming pool, trying to outline classic Universalism for another guest. He was a black man, a Baptist, the chief of a mid-sized city fire department. So we got to talking about the fires of hell, naturally. I told him that old-time Universalists didn't believe in hell or the devil. God loves forever all, they said. God loves forever all. And no one was born just so they could be condemned to eternal punishment. And then he threw me for a loop with what should have been an easy question. So how do you get saved? I started in on a long response. Whoops, that's too bright. I started in on a long response about how we don't look at things that way anymore, about how people are free to work out their own religious paths and so on and so forth. And he said again, but I still don't see how you get saved in your religion. I couldn't answer in religious terms that he was familiar with. Honestly, I just couldn't say. Then a few days later, the right words came to me. You know how that happens. The problem is I'd gone home. I wanted to rush back, find the guy, tell him that I just had a flash for the first time myself about what the Universalist tradition still teaches us about getting saved. You get saved by living as if everyone has got to be. Saved from what? Saved from what? From any kind of hell that people have constructed for each other or for themselves, because the hells that we make to purify our world of something we don't like are the only ones that exist. I hope that makes sense. I'm not saying that I understand it completely or that I'm living that way yet, but I wish I could have told the fire chief that you get saved by living as if everyone has got to be. That should give you a kind of effervescent joy. Well, it was too late, so I had to save these words for someone else to overhear some other time. When you miss one opportunity, you just have to wait for another. Now, Dorcine may have been the worst Universalist Unitarian I'd ever met. But I, who am certainly not the best you'll ever meet, have to say this for her. She tried to push others out of the church, or else she threatened to leave while the stained glass angels all sang hallelujah. But she stayed. She kept coming back for opportunity after opportunity to hear the message of the church she'd grown up in which her family practically owned. She didn't leave, in spite of all the damage and the bitter feelings that her threats to do so had caused for so very many years. She kept coming back. She stayed, for better or for worse. And for all I know, she's finally overheard the Universalist message and gotten it. You get saved by living as if everyone has got to be: the poor, the rich, the lambs, the leaders, and the led. May you always be prepared to overhear such truth in your hearts and to let it move your hands towards acts of loving kindness. For there's only one feast and only one table where we all sit together, where no one is set on top like a king or queen or with a plum in their mouth and mint sauce on the side. Blessed be. Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you. You could unmute
Thank
now. I'm going to roll up my shade and little more light in here. We had some clouds roll in here in the Pacific Northwest, if you can imagine that.
Well, here it's dark.
Right.
Yeah.
When he comes back, we need to tell him he should have had a jacket and tie on for the service.
Well, I have my tie. I don't remember when I last tied that thing, but it was a long time ago. That knot could be older than my son. It's possible.
Wow. And your son is how old?
28.
I've got ties like that. I'm not sure I want to even show them.
No, I never wore a tie for church service,
Well,
not even for memorial.
we're going to open this for conversation and keep recording. If anyone doesn't want to, just raise your hand and we'll make sure that we'll shut the recording off at that time.
Yeah, we can pause it if someone doesn't want to have their comment recorded. Yeah.
And so if you'd like to talk, just raise your hand either physically or through the raise hand function. I found in this new version that I have of Zoom, sometimes when I do various things, different things begin to happen, like balloons start to flow and hearts stream across my screen. I have no idea how that happens. But I'm just going to take one last leave here and say, Craig, thank you so much.
Oh,
That was
thank
one.
you. Thank you
Thank
for
you so much.
inviting me, really.
And again, from the heart, it's an excellent message.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, people forget sometimes that universalism is profound. It's profound. This is not some religion light that needs to, you know, humbly try and hide around something like Buddhism. It had the potential to become a truly great world religious movement, and who knows, maybe it will again.
If I may say something, one of the things that handicaps universalism is that the average Unitarian Universalist minister knows almost nothing about it. I
That's right.
remember when I was at divinity school, there was a course in the history of Unitarianism and Universalism, and it began with Universalism, of course, because Universalism is older.
Right.
And then when we got to 1815 or so, and Hosea Ballou was firmly a Unitarian, that is, a Unitarian with a small u, meaning
Right.
he believed that Jesus was just a man and not God. The course then focused exclusively on Unitarianism from 1815 until 1961, when Universalism was mentioned only once more as that other group that the Unitarians joined to form the UUA. In other words, most of Universalist history was completely ignored.
Oh my.
And this is the case with most UU ministers. They know nothing about 20th century universalism. I remember having a conversation with a minister who said, well, I don't want to talk about everyone going to heaven and everyone escaping hell. And I said, well, 20th century universalism didn't talk about that at all. If you look at the way universalism was describing itself in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, there was none of that language.
Right.
It's that's one of the real handicaps of universalism. It was all wrapped up and put in the attic at UU headquarters and left wrapped tight.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I know that Bucky McKeeman came to Starr King after Bob Kimball's long presidency at Starr King School, but Bucky came very, very old and very, very tired. So I don't know how much he was able to really impact that teaching of universalism. Of course, he was one of the prominent Universalist ministers of the mid 20th century. Donna K. Simonton, I see you have a comment, a question.
Yeah, yeah. The revelation for the last half hour is to equate safe and save. An awful lot of talking about religion, if you're talking about being saved, or if someone's telling you I'm saved, it means that there's been some other intervention from who knows where. But your message so focuses on how helping someone be safe at this time with what's going on throughout the world, throughout our country. The concept of being safe, to me, is extremely powerful.
It is. It truly is. Yeah, and you can't separate. You have to think about safe when you think about saved. You certainly do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Universalist. Go ahead.
Many people have grown up knowing the church lady that you described, or and one works around them and through them and finds valuable elements. But I must say, the take-home message for me tonight will be thinking about making sure that I work for safety and not necessarily salvation. And my take-home message for last month is right here.
Oh, okay.
I discovered that based on the comments from a number of the folks last month, I did not know enough about, I know a lot about the early and the famous Universalists, but I didn't know an awful lot about any of the things that were mentioned in conversation last month. So lo and behold, I now have 3 books. I'm not through either one or either. Universalism in America, a documentary history of a liberal faith. Varieties of Christian Universalism, exploring 4 views. And Universalism 101, God is Love, Richard Trudeau.
I'm going to run get another book in my bookcase. I'll be right back. I want to get that book and show it to you because I think it's been reissued in a legible modern form. I'll be right back.
Well, when Craig is gone, does anyone just want to say hi to anyone? Like I've said hi to my good friend Rebecca, who I found out had COVID. Oh my goodness gracious, but is now better. So, Craig, before you go back, we're just going to have a few moments of fellowship. Anyone was? Go ahead, Jack.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. I had trouble getting my camera working, which of course has the microphone too. I wanted to say something and I totally forgot what it was.
Oh no.
Oh, yeah, Richard, where is your book available? Richard? There you are.
Amazon or the UUA bookstore.
Great, thanks.
Well, there's something I understand that there is a new edition. I think it might just be a facsimile reproduction of this book, which the Universalist provided for its members. This is an 1853 edition of the Universalist Book of Reference, and there was one that I used to pore over in my Universalist church office, but I didn't own a copy because they were rare, and of course it was totally out of print. But it's one of the most amazing resources. This was, people, these, kind of educated farmers who were the backbone of universalism. They, well, how do you answer, your Bible thumping neighbors who say everyone's going to hell, but the elect few? And they provided this, and it's just the most wonderful resource. And I think it's perfectly useful today, since you still have people who are basically still on that same page. But some of the oh my gosh, the Bible doctrine of hell, Bible doctrine concerning the devil, Bible doctrine concerning demons, Bible doctrine of rewards and punishments, Bible doctrine of judgment. On it goes. On the phrases eternal life and everlasting life. On the case of Judas, it's just like it steers you to the parts of the Bible that the Universalists felt really supported their point of view. So that's one book I want to show you. I also want to show you another book. This is a book by my friend Valerie Kuhn Reed, who's here with us tonight. Valerie and I have known each other for over 50 years, and she's the author of a book that's been getting a lot of attention. And if you want to talk about, the practice of getting saved, finding salvation, finding a way to safety through dark places, you ought to take a look at this book. It's called One Stop West of Hinsdale. So anyway, don't miss a chance to see that. It's getting a lot of attention these days. And there's Valerie on my screen. She's right in the middle. Thank you for coming, Val. I'm so pleased. But then there's rich resources, but for Universalists, I can't possibly emphasize this one enough.
Hinsdale is in my neck of the woods. What's one step west of Hinsdale?
Clarendon Hills.
Clarendon Hills.
I finally unmuted myself. I was trying to say thank you to you, Craig, and I just kept pushing my picture. Yes, I see you're from DeKalb, and Clarendon Hills is the stop west of Hinsdale. That's where I grew up. But Craig and I went to high school together in Hinsdale.
We did indeed, and we've survived.
Yes.
Talk about meeting some of the rich and powerful. Our humble families didn't entirely fit.
Is Elmhurst east or
Craig,
west?
what is the name of that 1853 book? What's the name of the book?
The Universalist Book of Reference. And it's the 1853 edition. There might have been earlier ones and there might have been later ones. Someone got me this edition as a gift when I'd mentioned it, and I'd mentioned how I wish I had one. And a member of one of my congregations went and looked and found one. Got him. It might have been earlier than eBay, but he found it somehow and gave me a copy. I was just, it's a treasure. And it's clearly like it's been through some moisture damage. It might have been in a flood or something like that. And but it's definitely a rare book. But I do believe that there was in the last few years, there's a large format, kind of like the ones we saw earlier. But I think it's a photocopy of this book, but I believe it's readable. From what I've heard, it's readable. Yeah. Oh, Donna, did you have another question or comment? Yeah.
Yeah. One, I can tell you that the book you've just referred to, the book of What did I
of
write?
reference.
References. I will tell you that there is not a copy of that in the library at Universalist National Memorial in Washington, D.C. I'm very familiar with what's in that library there, and that is not present there. And I'm going to get the folks there and see if I can't get them working on
Oh,
identifying and making sure that that gets there.
there may be one available online. If I can find that, I'll send the link to Jay for an online, and it's just, again, it's like basically a photocopy of one of the old editions. Jay, you had a comment or a question?
Yes, I'm going to use Moro without attributing, I'm sorry to say, your image of there's only one feast. Because I frequently say, being of immigrant stock, with my grandparents came here from Poland, that, my grandparents struggled, but my parents clearly got invited to the mountaintop, and I'm there now, with all the benefits of being part of this great. And we've seen this too with gays and blacks and lesbian, trans. There's always, what I find, more room at the mountaintop, and no one needs to be decentered or pushed away to make room for more. And I think that's a great way to see the things. But I'm going to say there's always room at the feast, at the table for the feast. There's always more room. And I think that's a good way of seeing our inherent worth and dignity, and the ability to invite more in without having to exclude anyone. So thanks for that imagery.
An infinitely expanding table. But we
Yeah.
have to be able to laugh at each other's table manners a little bit and ask questions. Wesley.
Well, in that regard, although I have a couple of other things to say, you might look up, it's in the Gray Hymnal, which is about the welcome table. Everyone's going to sit at the welcome table. And that's a great Universalist hymn. It's, I think it's part of it's the desire from when you're saying, will the circle be unbroken? And the Universalist said, yes. You start singing that. And one reason why there was a kind of a Baptist tone to the whole thing in days gone by is they got to singing, and, everybody's going to be there. Hooray! The thing I was thinking about, though, there is a mentioning the great dearth of misunderstanding about Universalism. I've been working on something, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I had thought about putting it in the Universalist Herald. It's a whole thing about Universalists and science, which will not be what you think it will be, I don't think. There's more to it than you can believe. You also, Universalists had the idea that Universalists were only rural, although I served a rural Universalist church, is that there were huge Universalist churches. I was in one in New England, which was fairly empty at that day, but at one time the thing had been utterly filled. And there were actually probably more urban Universalists than there were rural ones. Yeah. Which is something that we don't realize, especially the 1,000-member churches. That's almost unbelievable how many of them there were. Yeah. But that's just a teaser. I don't think Phil Giles even understood that. Now, Dana Greeley was part Universalist. The Greeleys were not solely Unitarian. There were Horace Greeley was a Universalist, right? And of a big city newspaper. And
The New
so
York Post? Was it the New York Post or? I can't remember.
I think so. He hired Margaret Fuller, who
Right.
couldn't get a job. He hired her and made her a correspondent. One of his other correspondents was Karl Marx, curiously enough, who used to write what was going on in Europe. And I don't know how that went, but I don't know what Marx wrote for the paper. But
Yeah.
the interesting part about this is that I think there's a misunderstanding. And I was reading about a second Universalist in Chicago. Chicago's first Universalist originally was a huge thing on Prairie Avenue where all the millionaires were. And it was sometimes called the Church of the Millionaires. So that's something I have been looking into now for some time. Universalism wasn't, and so forth, what we think it is necessarily.
Yeah. That rural thing
Very
is
much.
somewhat of an exaggeration. Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about recently, because I was reading a book about the empowerment controversy, and John Cummins was staying with his church in the Twin Cities, which is and has been one of the biggest Universalist churches in the country. Whether it was when he did it, it died down around World War II sometime, and then it had to be revived. But before then, too, there were, you know, a Universalist church, more than one of them, that's had a very, very large congregation up in the Twin Cities, and Universalist churches out west. And some of these survive and have influenced things until the present day. The church in Lincoln that Ted Sorensen was a member of was originally a Universalist congregation that had a great big brick building. He was the writer for Kennedy, and they started calling it the Unitarian Church because the Universalists didn't have money to lend them one time when they needed it. And they asked the Unitarians, would you think you could find some money for us? And the AUA lent money to the church in Lincoln, Nebraska. The Lincoln Church is still going. There are a number of places, and many of them were urban. So I don't want to keep going on this, but I haven't figured out quite what to do with it because it doesn't look like the Universalist history that you're talking about being taught. Because, well, just to give a modern interesting instance, there's a tiny church. Was it Liberty? Was it in Alabama or Mississippi? There was a tiny Universalist church down there. And the person who did the translation for the New Testament, everybody had to take, at the University of Chicago, we all had to take New Testament, Old Testament, history, and so forth. But the most up-to-date German text that they used that was translated by the fellow from way down south in the little Universalist church. Mm-hmm. So their Universalists still around.
Yeah.
And
I was in Central Illinois for several years. Oh, go ahead. I was in Central Illinois for several years.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was more interested in hearing the story, but if anybody has any idea about what to do with any of this, because this doesn't look like, it's not, and Universalists were very progressive about labor and a whole series of other things. So they were quite interesting. Some of them weren't either. And there were some very, very rich, prominent Universalists that we never think of as Universalists. Some of them may be on that difficult list.
I want to make a comment.
Please do.
I did a minor in history, and I have pursued an enormous amount of history over the past years based on the fact that it became necessary and much of interest and so forth. And in answering to some of Wesley's comment, like the differences is there is a conclusion among us who have discussed history at great length, is that history frequently exists only in the opinions and writings of the person who produced that history. And I think that when you are a person who reads constantly, and what you're reading are some of the readings I've read lately, we won't even go into, but you come up with the, well, yeah, he has made some interesting points. However, she missed the so and so, and what about this part? And so our conclusion is more that every quote historian or person who chooses to record history comes, as most humans do, with their own prejudices, with their own knowledge that may or may not. I mean, when I get online sometimes and I'm reading some of the materials that they supply, and I know absolutely some of it is dead wrong, but it's put out in Wikipedia. So, of course, that's being promoted. So, history is always fascinating in that direction because it all depends on who was there at the time to some extent, also, and what their opinions are as they write. I commented recently when someone in a social action committee said, do you remember a book that we read 20 years ago and it was written by so-and-so and we knew him and blah, 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 and so forth. And does anyone still by any chance have the book or remember it? And it so happened I did. But the comment that I made on the book was, thank goodness the author who was self-published, which already tells you something, and if it's self-published, it frequently another publisher won't even pick it up. But I said, thank goodness 28 pages of the book are almost all quotes from other people, because they're at least better written and more accurate than the author. And several people wrote back and said, I couldn't have said it better. So as I say, it's all a matter of the prejudices. Reading, when I was in Ireland and I was reading the Book of Kells, and I thought, well, the most interesting and most beautiful part of the Book of Kells is actually the beautiful artwork around the literature. So you're never going to find history to be 100%. And it will be interesting 100 years from now how this period in our history might be recorded if we're still here.
Certainly will be. Well, I'm going to let Jay talk. I think, Jay, you might have something to wrap things up tonight.
Well, and just a brief comment, and this is the circle I got into. This is to Evelyn, because I was doing some research about Unitarian history here in Atlanta. And a story was often told that the first Unitarian minister who came to Atlanta created a free lending library. This is in the 1880s, created a free lending library. At the time, libraries were paid subscriptions. This is a free lending library open to women and Blacks. Great story to be told by
liberal.
by liberal Unitarians. Absolutely not true whatsoever. So there were other stories told along those lines. And when I approached Peter Gibson, who wrote about the civil rights movement, I contacted him because he was repeating this in his book. And when I said I'll share with him some correcting facts, he said, if you're really interested in this, you should attend this Universalist convocation in Louisville, Mississippi at the Liberty Universalist Church. And that's how I got here, by correcting a historical fact in someone else's work. So,
good for you.
Well, I'm going to need to go and eat dinner, but I want to go back to something that may be legendary, it may be real, but it's from the what's it called? From the Larger Hope, the Russell Miller's 2-volume history of Universalism, description of Jonathan Murray and Eliza, his wife, first wife. who had been involved with one of the Hellfire and Brimstone Methodist groups and went to visit as young people in London. One of the fun things you could do is go to other churches. That's cheap, free entertainment. And they visited the Universalist group at the time, probably reading James Relly at the time. And I'm not thinking at all about the theology or anything like that, but what they remarked was how happy people seemed. And that's so contrasted with the grim experience that they had on a Sunday morning. And that's what I want to leave you with, is that one of the most important things is, if this stuff moves you and it touches you, there ought to be an effervescence. There ought to be an effervescence that you can tap into. It ought to make you smile. It ought to make you smile while you're walking down the street, and people are going to say, "What the hell are you smiling at?" Well, I'm smiling that there's no hell. Thank you very much. But anyway, I want to.
Well, Craig, I'm going to use your words for closing.
Okay, sure.
And thank you so much. We have our next meeting in October. Helen, do you know the date? I forget. But it's the first Wednesday in the next month. And Derek Parker will return with, he says, a much better performed and prepared sermon for us. So you'll all get your notice because you've signed up before. And I want to leave again with a very large thanks, and from myself, the Universalist Convocation, I'm sure everyone who's here, for your wonderful sermon this evening, Craig. So I'm going to say good night to all. And Richard, you can shut down the recording now.
Take care. Thank you so much. It was just a real pleasure and an honor to be